In today's video, we're continuing on with our NHL season previews on the Metropolitan Division. Today, we take a look at the Columbus Blue Jackets. The Jackets were big players in free agency. How much improvement will we see this year? Can they contend for playoffs? We'll discuss that coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, today we're taking a look at the Columbus Blue Jackets and previewing their upcoming 22-23 NHL season. Of course, as we know, there was a lot of changes through the offseason, and Columbus was one of the big surprise teams this offseason, making a real big signing, catching everybody off guard. So we'll get into that and see how the team has changed, of course, and see what we can expect from them for the upcoming year. But first, we're going to recap last year, take a look at where things kind of ended, take a look at their recent playoff history, the head coach, and kind of examine how the team has changed, prospects, and what we project for them this coming year. So let's first recap last season before we get into how the team has changed. They were 6th place in the Metro last year with 81 points, with a record of 37, 38, and 7. So they were pretty much a 500 team, 81 points, obviously out of the playoffs. But, really, if you think about the improvements this team has made, and they can obviously be better, it does make you wonder how much of an improvement they'll see. Can they be a 90-plus point team this year? Time will tell, but we'll get into that here as the video goes along. Last year, they scored 262 goals, which is certainly respectable, around league average for 14th best. But the problem was they gave up 300, which is a big problem for this team. 28th best in the NHL in goals against last year. That certainly needs to get a lot better. That much we know for sure. The power play was not as good as it needs to be. A little bit anemic, 18.6% for 24th best. And the PK was not the best either, 78.6% for 20th best. So I do think head coach Brad Larson has to make some adjustments. Obviously, having the adjusted lineup will help a little bit with some of these areas. But the special teams definitely needs to get better, and they got to greatly cut down on goals against if they're going to have any hope to move up in a very tough Metropolitan Division and have any shot at getting into the playoffs. Now let's take a look at the Jackets' recent playoff history. They've been out of the playoffs for the past 2 years. Prior to that, they had made it for 4 straight seasons. So they were a consistent team there for a while, but they've only ever won one series. And of course, that was a few years back under head coach John Tortorella. We saw the Jackets and Jarmo Kekalainen kind of making a lot of big moves at the deadline and load up. And they did have a surprise first round series win. Of course, that's when they acquired like Matt Duchene, Ryan Dzingel, and a bunch of other players at the deadline. They obviously did get some rewards. First ever franchise win in the playoffs for the Jackets, which was great to see. They then lost in round 2. And then, of course, they haven't done much since. I know they gave up a lot, though, to make those moves and to get into the playoffs and to make that happen. I always questioned myself, was it really worth it? I mean, it was great to see them get that first playoff series win under the franchise's belt here, under their team history. But, it's kind of hurt them since, in my opinion. So, of course, Brad Larson took over from John Tortorella. Last year was his first season behind the bench. This will be his second season coming up. Of course, GM Jarmo Kekalainen has been there for quite some time. And, really kind of well-respected and considered a pretty solid GM. Has been at it for some time. A good veteran GM there to lead the Jackets to make a lot of good moves this offseason. So let's take a look now at how this team has changed. Even though the changes, there's not a ton of them, but they were, fairly significant for what we did see. Of course, the big addition and the surprise was Johnny Gaudreau signing there as a free agent from the Calgary Flames. A lot of people did not predict that. Obviously, the Jackets were not expected to be one of the teams kind of in the mix here. Not a huge shocker to me that Gaudreau left Calgary. I kind of had that feeling that he wanted to play closer to home. A lot of people are pointing at Columbus saying, well, it's not that close to where he's from in around South Jersey. A lot of people thought Flyers, which would have been his childhood team, would have a great chance, but of course they had no cap space. They really weren't in a great spot to take him on. Didn't make sense in some capacities and just not possible in others. The Devils, of course, were really close to home as well. There were some people there were some rumors floating around that the Islanders were in the mix. Of course, that's kind of all much closer. Columbus is still, a good distance away even by plane. But at the same time, Johnny Gaudreau did explain himself, kind of indicating that, it's sometimes you don't want to be right close to home. It's still close enough that you can be there by plane I think it's like 3 or 4 hours by car, an hour plane ride. Like, it's not that bad, right? So, at the end of the day, sometimes you want your family close, but not too close. And that's kind of basically how he explained it. And, I don't think that he really saw an opportunity to get what he wanted too close to home. Columbus made a phone call just to see if they stood a chance, made an offer, and boom, it came together rather quickly. So, of course, his teammate, Erica Branson from the Flames, also had signed in free agency before he did. So, of course, that might have went a little bit into his decision here as well. But certainly a lot of good things. Nobody's really had anything bad to say about Columbus. I know at one point there was a lot of people thinking that nobody wanted to stay there. They had a mass exodus, right, of players that were leaving the franchise, and that's come to an end now, and they brought in a big name, which is good for the team, good for the city. Of course, they also have guys like Victor Rask and James Neal. They're not guaranteed to be on the roster. They are there in a PTO. They could be additions, and they're additions to training camp, but we'll see where that goes. As far as subtractions go, well, they had to make some cap space after signing Johnny Hockey, so they traded Oliver Bjorkstrand. Now, I was a little surprised that Bjorkstrand was the guy that went. I thought they might try to unload the final year of Gus Nyquist or something to that effect. Bjorkstrand, to me, was a real good, solid goal scorer. Actually, Oliver Bjorkstrand, after getting traded, ended up selling his house to Johnny Gaudreau as well. I'm not sure if anybody knew that, but just a little tidbit there that was interesting. But I was surprised that it was him. He had term on his contract, a good player, drafted, developed, good goal scorer. I know you got to move something with value when you're tight up against the cap so that teams actually want to take it on. But really, with Gus Nyquist, 1 year left, would it have been that difficult, even if you had to retain some salary? That really surprised me. And as much as I do agree with a lot of the moves I've seen Kekäläinen make, that might be one that they come to regret. I mean, getting Johnny, it was great, but having to lose Bjorkstrand, and it could have went, I thought, in a different direction. To me, was interesting. Of course, Alex Texier is not going to be with the team this year. He's not a permanent subtraction, but of course, he's dealt with a lot off the ice family-wise. Of course, took a leave of absence last year, went back to Europe, and he is going to play in Switzerland, which is much closer to where he's from in France. Kind of the same scenario as Johnny in a sense. Like, he's close to home, but not like right there. That way he can get home if he needs to very quickly instead of having to go all the way across the ocean. Of course, it's a much different scenario. And I heard a lot of people say that about Texier as well, saying, well, he's from France. Why is he playing in Switzerland? Like, this just sounds like BS. Like, well, it's not really. Like, he's actually not all that far. If you think about it, being home by a plane in like an hour or two is a big difference than having to jump across the ocean and go to a different continent. It's a completely different story, right? So Texier likely makes the return at some point. At least the Jackets hope he does. And it won't likely be a permanent subtraction. Of course, they're starting the year with Korpisalo injured as well after having a major hip surgery. I don't know what the future holds for Korpisalo. They did re-sign him. They didn't have to do that, but they did do that in the offseason, and we'll see how he fits into their long-term plans here. But besides guys like Gaudreau and Gabranson coming in and Bjorkstrand going out, do they have any prospects that's going to have an impact this year? And the answer is absolutely yes, they will. And Kent Johnson by far is the top guy. I mean, nobody's going to come as a surprise for me saying that he's going to make this team out of training camp and be a regular player. He's going to be a real good one too. Like, he's had a real good start to his career, even though it's limited. Obviously he had a chance to play in the World Juniors too. This guy looks like a real dynamic player, and he's going to probably he might have to start lowering your lineup, which I'll show you here momentarily, but I think by the end of the year, Johnson's going to be a player along with a guy like Cole Sillinger, who is not really a prospect anymore after playing more last year, but those two guys are going to be huge parts of this future of this team. Nick Blankenberg, of course, came over as a college signing at the end of the season, had a real good showing. I do think that he's got a real good chance to be a big part of this team this year as well. Hard to say exactly where he fits, and he may not necessarily be a regular in the top six for Blue Line, but I'm definitely going to be in there for sure, getting a fair bit of NHL time this year. And I do expect Daniil Tarasov will likely going to get a chance to play more in the NHL as a backup goalie to Elvis, with Korpisalo not being available. So what does your lineup look like going into the season? Well, I'm projecting right now your top line's likely going to be Patrick Laine and Johnny Gaudreau on the wings, with probably Boone Jenner. Now, Boone Jenner is dealing with a back injury. They're kind of being patient, careful with him to start the year. I don't see Jenner staying in that spot as your number one center, though. I do think they have more dynamic options, and I think you're going to see either a combination of either Cole Sillinger or Jack Roslovic move up to take that spot and Jenner move down, to me that makes sense. If Jenner could be your number 2 and eventually your number 3, that would be better for this team moving forward, I think, because I think those guys need a more dynamic offensive player. And, that's just my opinion. If Cole Sillinger, I think, has that ability, and he can be a real breakout player this year and eventually take that top role. Like, he surprised a lot of people last year, and I think that's going to continue to go. But we often do see second season growing pains, and we'll have to tread carefully, I think, with him. But I do see Jenner starting at the 1C spot. Your second line likely would be Voracek, Roslovic, and Nyquist. Your third line is going to have some younger youth here that could be very dynamic, and Kent Johnson, Cole Sillinger, and Marchenko. And then I see Sean Corrales centering Robinson and Olivier on your fourth line. Now, your D-core will be as follows. I believe, obviously, Zach Werenski, we know, is by far the top D on this team, likely paired with Peak. You get Gavrikov and Boqvist likely being your number 2 pair, with Jake Bean and Eric Branson likely being your third. But I do wonder about Nick Blankenberg and where he fits. He did well, and I think he'll be good chance to be on the roster. Maybe he goes to the minors and as a call-up, but I do think there's a chance here that he could crack that top 6, or at least, kind of force one of these other guys to maybe be the number 7D and get more playing time. But I do see him getting a more of a chance for sure, regardless of how that works out. Your goalies are going to be Elvis Merzlikins and Tarasov, considering Korpisalo was hurt. And if Korpisalo can make it back, then obviously he'll be the backup to Elvis once he does. But I do think the Jackets are going to be a dynamic team. I think we're going to see more offense, obviously, but they have a big hill to climb to get into the playoffs, and I wouldn't rule it out. I think the Jackets are going to be one of the more interesting teams to me this year because of the significant change. Like, to me, teams like Columbus, Calgary, even Pittsburgh, bringing back all the players that they did, they're going to be the more fascinating ones for me to watch this year. Even Ottawa too, like Detroit, we saw significant change with really good players, but it doesn't mean it's going to mesh real well, and it's hard to say the whole team dynamic. Sometimes there's like a getting used to, like an adjustment period, you could say, and I wonder if that's going to, take a little while, or will it just be an instantly better team? It's hard to say, right? We'll have to wait and see, but I do think they'll be able to score more goals, which will push them up the ladder a little bit. I think they can be more offensive than last year. The big thing is can they defend better? Can they cut down on the goals against? And that's the part I'm not completely sold on. Obviously, bringing in Eric Branson does add a big body back there who, yes, he's not afraid to drop the gloves. He's not afraid to be physical. He can throw some big hits sometimes. But in my honest opinion, Eric Branson is not very good defensively. I've seen him up close numerous times, followed his career closely. I was surprised at the money they threw at him. He did have a good year in Calgary last year, but that might be, I'm worried for the Jackets' sake that might be a contract that you see some improvements in a really good team, which kind of maybe propped up his value a bit and then get overpaid in free agency. Maybe he'll prove us wrong, but that's one of the free agent contracts I do worry about not looking so good in a quick period of time. And I wouldn't be shocked if Branson is a guy that, over time, hard to say if he'll be in the regular top 6 or not. I think they'll give him every opportunity to, based on what he's getting paid and the fact they went out in free agency and got him. But it's going to be tough. Like, to me, that's a big part of it. I think they have the offensive tools to score a few more goals, to get the power play better. But can they defend? It's a big, big question mark. I think they'll be more in the mix for playoffs. I think we'll probably see a stronger team in Columbus than probably like Philly or Jersey, which is the same as last year. The Islanders are a bit of a wild card. I think the Jackets and Islanders might be, maybe Washington. Washington's going to be an interesting team to watch too. There's a lot of changes there. But I do think Washington has a little bit more of a solid foundation that the Jackets might have a tough time moving up any higher than they did last year. I do think they can make it a little bit more interesting. We'll see how this team goes here in the future. They're going to be fun to watch, that's for sure. Going to definitely see some growth. Playoffs without one of the other teams falling off more than we're expecting will be a challenge. There's no doubt. But I think they'll be able to at least make it interesting down the stretch, and we'll see what they can do. Let me know what you think. Can the Jackets get in the playoffs with these improvements to their lineup? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments, and we'll discuss further. Of course, if you're new to the channel, of course, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the latest news, rumors, and analysis on all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.